Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the World IA Cafe Speaker Series. Thank you for joining in today. We have an excellent webinar for you, and I'm sure you will immensely enjoy it. My name is Rupa Mishra. I'm an associate professor at Rutgers University. I manage and teach in the user experience design as well as the product design concentrations in the MBS program. I'm also a very active member of World IA Association. The topic for today's webinar is taxonomy and terminology in practice. The speakers for this interactive event are Erin Smith and Bonnie Brown-Real. Both of them are veterans in this field of information architecture. Each of them has more than 2 decades of experience. So I was thinking if we had to combine, it is more than 40 years of experience. So they have a lot of things in the bios. What I will do, I will share the LinkedIn profile links in the chat. So let me do that.
And thank you, Rupa, for the kind introduction.
Oh, very welcome. So let me do this quick. Also, I would like you to know that we will be recording all the speakers in this World IA Cafe series, and the videos would be available on the World IA's website. Let me put that in the chat as well. It is a great organization to network and meet people from all over the world. If you're interested, I would suggest you to join the organization. Each year we host the World IA Day, and this has been going on since 2012. The format for the cafe series is this: about 45-50 minutes would be the talk, followed by 5-10 minutes Q&A, depending how many questions we have. But what I've been noticing, we do have quite a few questions, so please don't hesitate to ask as many questions as you like. Also, I would like to remind you, everyone, this is a great opportunity to network and connect with one another. If you like, you can share your LinkedIn profile link in the chat. Let me put mine. Networking is so important, always, not just in today's world. I will also share my department's website link if anyone is interested in our user experience design or our product design master's programs. All I can say is enjoy the webinar today, and now over to Erin and Bonnie.
Thank you so much, Rupa. Programs like this also don't happen without the support of people who are both keenly interested in the topic, see the value of it, and then actually getting forward to host such things. So an appreciation to you as well as others for helping facilitate it. I'm honored to be joined here by Bonnie to speak a little bit about the practice we've seen in tech companies around taxonomy and terminology. And what we hope you will get from today is a little bit about just what we've seen in practice, a little of the different stages of maturity, and some practices we found useful in that time frame. Also, would love to hear your questions. Those are by far some of the juiciest things that happen. I remember having a similar presentation probably 10 years ago, where we spent half an hour afterwards discussing, primary choices in semantic and terminology suites and how you arbitrate between them. So like literally sometimes it's the best part, but I hope you'll walk away with a few things from Bonnie and myself as well. So that said, I'm going to let Bonnie introduce herself first, and then I'll give a quick recap and then of myself, and we'll get into it.
Hello, I am Bonnie Brown-Real, and I'm dialing in from sunny San Diego. I'm an information architect and taxonomist with a background in library and info science. And I've been kicking around digital ecosystems for pretty much all of my career, working on structured metadata and classification solutions. And I'm doing this most presently for DocuSign, where I'm situated in a product design and experience org and focusing on building and evangelizing taxonomy systems.
Thanks, Bonnie. And I'm Erin Smith. I've come about, I would say, library science and information architecture by a way of practice and amazing people like Bonnie that I've gotten to work with along the way. So I actually came around from a business degree. I live in Washington now, but originally started my career in California. Worked at Citrix and DocuSign primarily in terms of tech companies, although did some adult learning theory and such at Stanford and Stanford Linear Accelerator before that. Anyway, but what I found is that this is a magic key. And so, I'm excited to be here today to share with you guys a little bit about how I found it useful in organizations. And kind of, I think one of the things we want to make sure we cover is a little bit on the what, we are expecting maybe more so than any other call. This is probably full of folks who are very familiar with the what. And so we'll spend more time on the why and then ultimately the how. And not the details of the how, but actually the how you get others bought into it, because that really is, at least from my experience, what I found to be the stumbling block is it's not hard to create the actual taxonomy, but it's hard to create one that everybody can use and that can grow and thrive. And so, this is I think, and ultimately a amazing strength any company can bring into it, or any organization, to bring comprehension to people, right? Which is, if you can't understand something, how can you use it? And I'm very excited to foster that with you guys. So with that said, I think we'll spend just 2 seconds on the difference between terminology and taxonomy. Not ashamed to admit that I got this pretty badly wrong when I very first started with it 15 to 20 years ago. And so that difference between what is a term and a definition, right, and maybe rules for use, and that taxonomy, the organizational structure that helps provide a relationship and kind of sense making to things, right? A common metaphor many of us have probably heard before, but is the tree, where the branch and the trunk really form that taxonomy. That is the structure underneath, and the leaves may be something more prolific. There's something that are attached or associated to those branches and trunks, but do change quite a bit. Right. And so I think a healthy practice as well mimics this metaphor, where you need to prune it pretty routinely. You need to look at the health of it as well. And actually the natural flourishing of the leaves sort of leads to new branches and things that may be needed. So it's not a totally tired metaphor. It is useful. However, there are ways we can add to that too. Other things we're going to cover, as we mentioned, is the maturity model, right? So thinking about, again, this is just from our practice and built on some general maturity models out there. But you start with siloed groups, really trying to achieve goals. And I think part of our role is to be a catalyst through that, to help bring people to shared practices and documents and definitions, eventually to more unified holistic ways to approach concepts and organization. And then if you're lucky, eventually systematizing that. And so we're going to share a little bit about each of these as we go forward. And you'll notice I said a lot of the why in the context, but the real details are coming as Bonnie kind of gets into some of her use cases that are active right now. So these are different things, whether I was working in brand and content and product, I think there's different points where you can kind of listen and hear reasons why a practice in terminology and taxonomy might be needed, right? And sometimes more heavily one than the other. They are, in my mind, kind of symbiotic and in the end, but it could be more along the lines of, we're seeing legal cases come in about because we're not naming products correctly, right? Or customers are not understanding things that we offer, and they're getting stumbled, somewhere in the, it could be purchase, it could be the use of a product. It could also be that you see just many terms out there for the same thing. I remember a support case at my most recent company where there literally was a spreadsheet tracking, here's the one thing and here's the 5 to 10 things it might be called, right? And that is just hard for not only that support rep, but think about the customers trying to make sense of all that, what they purchased and what they're trying to do and what you actually have to offer. So there's many roads and reasons and catalysts that can drive you to look at this, but I think it is a stealthy tool that you can use to help elevate a company and or organization in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. Some basic benefits, starting with terminology, I think just getting those customers to understand, getting closer to the natural language that they understand and helping them understand what they can do, right? You can strengthen your brand through this and eventually loyalty of customers. One of the most driving forces I have seen, frankly, is just the translation cost. This is in the content world and the marketing world, a heavy amount is paid when you have more than one word for a concept. You're paying for each of those words every single time it goes through. So your translation memory and everything will benefit greatly, as well as just the cost of translation if you're in a multinational situation through that, right? I think a DocuSign, the signing experience when you actually sign a document is a great example of that. It's translated into many languages, even just for the state of California, where Bonnie is, right? You need all those languages so to support the residents. And so making sure you have that as understood, the costs, and then you can help motivate the business case is a great place to start. Also, it's great for taxonomy management, not just because it's, again, tied to that terminology, but you can start to see benefits in things like your data and how you extrapolate. How many meetings I've sat in with other leaders where we're trying to figure out the right course of how to pay forward a better solution or experience. And we get caught up, frankly, for sometimes hours on not having the same definitions. And that stems from a different understanding of what the customer is going through or a person who is using services, as well as different data, right? So taxonomy not only can help with better product creation, all these things, with better support experience creation, with better content, but it also just can help organizational maturity in terms of their communication. So that, I think Bonnie's got some great examples she's seen recently too for use cases.
Yes, so particularly as I'm trying to elevate the programs and pillars around terminology and taxonomy, moving into that unification and platform and systems space, there are a suite of solutions that can drive out of that common system, and they attach to very real KPIs that move the needle in different parts of the business. So they can be positioned as critical scaffolding for AI and generative AI for automatic classification and predictive modeling, and in addition to generative AI and all of those initiatives and solutioning that is coming out of companies often without this critical scaffolding in place. You can position it as that. There is the bump to sales by way of paving the path through knowledge modeling for feature recommendation and adoption. There's content engagement that comes from the ability to build out common navigation frameworks and consistent language across them. Personalized experience can fall out of that as well by having connective tissue between information experience and what we understand and know about customers via their own profiles. Search dictionaries and faceted search are driven from taxonomy systems. There are very real benefits to SEO and coming from organic search as well, to having taxonomy as a core solution driving that work. The internal business insights, like Erin mentioned as well, in terms of having a common understanding of what data is coming back from customers as well, and how that can also move the needle on things like issue resolution and customer satisfaction, with that ability to have some connectivity across problems that are being reported and solutions we have to offer, and then also how we have an understanding around both of the above. So depending on what stakeholders are interested in what particular pieces of this marketing, there are core solutions coming out of taxonomy programs for them all.
Yeah, so the application of actually doing it, right, is one step, and it's not to say it's not hard work. I mean, wrapping your head around how many different sets of terminology and taxonomy may be used, and metadata may be used across different departments is not easy work. It takes time, but I think getting people convinced that that work needs to happen is actually where some of the harder obstacles can come in. The fact of the matter is, I think of both taxonomy and terminology, but also content, frankly, as corporate assets, because if you can do it well, you're helping to unlock all these benefits for the company. And as you're getting going, if you're in a beginning starting state on this, you can just kind of look around for the most frequently used or most powerful lists in the company, right? Or in an organization or in a customer's needs set, right? That could be things, some examples we've got here, but things like the product and feature name, and checking, does everybody have the same set of names for the products and features across the company? And then what do the customers refer to it as well? How do they search for it, right? Looking at markets and verticals served. It's a common place to find discrepancies between groups. And again, what do those markets and verticals call themselves? And the more you can drive some normalization there, the better off things are. And then also mapping, I would say, extensibility, and that could be to competitive feature sets and products, also environments that different products sit in. Again, thinking more of the tech origin that we're both in, but thinking about, hey, I'm using this product, but I know it's going to sit in there with these 3 other sets of products, and you have to understand those concepts those customers are familiar with too, right? So it's not just, I'd say, the competitive, but also the environmental features and products that are in use too. And then market segments, like how are you actually segmenting your customer base, and do people have consistency around there too? That also is partnered really well with an experience design or user experience, making sure you have good personas or profiles. In addition to your marketing teams will typically have buyer personas there too, right? So if you can bring some harmony to how you're talking about those segments, it helps to sort of synthesize the story of a person going through an experience. And then lastly, translation terminology is almost always somewhere I'll go look, assuming there are translations happening. Usually you can get that translation memory to spit out what your common words are. And that's, again, a good source of just where do we see duplication that might help us to drive some of those cost efficiencies. So a great place to start. And besides that, it's really just about getting buy-in. Like if you can get people bought into it, because remember, I'm in my silo. I'm trying to accomplish what my group needs to get done. We have a bottom line to hit, right? Or we're trying to drive down the support call time or time to resolution, the costs. And so if you can understand what each of those silos are trying to accomplish, right? And we could argue about whether these are actually good synthesis of what each department does, but if you can understand those you're working with and what they're trying to accomplish, you can then better create a space where you can create together. Because what you're doing in a taxonomical or a terminology management sense is not trying to create something new, but trying to normalize what's there so that these groups can work together for the betterment of the end user or customer, right? So then what we do is come in and apply, whether it's a process or a system or even just a behavior change and getting to share documents, right? But to really look at what is available that you can help rationalize across those different areas. This is a model, frankly, that just using this to say, hey, we want to take what you've got and help make it part of this thing. So we will make sure it works for what you're trying to get out of it. That can be a very powerful message, right? And then they know they have buy-in to where it's going and they will get what they need out of it. So ultimately, I think starting with terminology, which was, again, my origin point on this, but terminology gives us a shared language, whether that's better discussions with a customer, better discussions with a salesperson, a support rep, whether a product or product-led growth can have better key terms that are understandable by the customer. Really, that terminology also drives internal discussions too. So it gives us a shared language that we can then start from and add to. And I think Bonnie has an interesting concept too on how she addresses this with taxonomy, which frankly, I often get that question, like, what in the world are you even talking about there? So.
Yes. So I have found that a common connection point in our information architecture is using card sorting as a research exercise. So whether I'm working with a design experience team, a content or information org, customer success, People tend to have this idea of sorting cards and doing that kind of organization work as a research practice to start from. So the way I begin talking about terminology and how that drives into concept design is this idea that we need to not just pull from any set of cards, so just some existing structure that we might already have lying around the organization, but thinking as a first step about how to design the cards themselves. So what goes on the face of the card, what drives consistency across the deck, introducing the idea also that doing taxonomy as a practice, and particularly scaled taxonomy as a practice, isn't so much about forcing one way to sort things for all time as some kind of common sense of truth about things, which both causes alarm when you try to do it and also isn't kind of the right actual practice around things. It gives the idea that it's the design of the cards themselves and then the design of the rules for playing the deck. And when we think about it that way, we can kind of use the existing paradigm around card sorting exercises to get at these things in a little more detail. So we're designing both the leaves of the tree and how they have some commonality across them, and then taxonomy as these connection points that describe the way they interact. And so collectively, when we drive this upward toward this system or platform level, taxonomy is a little bit less in practice like the tree and a little more like this universal library system of cards, so that you've got both that uniformity of the design and these multi-directional understandings and schemified connection points between them.
Yeah, a quick add, if it's okay if I, but I think another thing I've found kind of to that empathy thing, it's not just understanding goals, but also if you look at these assets, right, there's going to be different sort of ways different groups are used to manifesting that. So like on the left here, we have an entity relationship diagram. So if you're doing work with, say, a architecture team on the software and the databases and the storage, understanding their language is useful, right? And that's how they're used to showing it. Versus if you fast forward over to the pricing and packaging team that's figuring out SKU lists, they're going to be driven entirely by that SKU list. And so you have to kind of be able to be that interpreter between these different things. And then once you can understand how they're used to seeing the world, it makes it easier for them to understand these different concepts, and that you're helping create a library of those concepts to connect to. And I love this thing, and Bonnie, Bonnie shared.
Yeah. So a little more around the why, I think, of these early stages of this process. It can be really efficient to just immediately start working with and mapping structures and card decks, if you will, that already exist. Always an important part of the input and assessment. But when we leave it at that stage, it's like kind of pulling together some sort of coherent design from a bunch of hodgepodge card decks you've pulled out of your junk drawer, your game cabinet. Maybe you've pulled it off the windshield of your car. It's a vivid image for why it's kind of worth it to take that one level of abstraction backward to what the card itself looks like, and kind of the general gamification that we especially really like to talk about in design. It's a useful mechanism for driving forward the idea that together taxonomy and terminology are pieced together as this card deck that can be sorted together lots of different ways.
Yeah, there's this magical moment in there where all of a sudden, if you can translate it to, they get the visual, sometimes just literally a visual showing all these things. I remember a brand iconography series, which is more visual language and terminology than actual, verbal term base. But even just throwing those all visually on a wall, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, how have we existed with these 13 different sets of icons? So it just helps to bring it home in a way that they're going to understand it. Which brings us also like that first step, right? So sharing and unifying. So getting folks out of their silo, understanding why they're there, and bringing everyone on a march towards that sharing and unification. And literally sharing can just be that, right? Creating a shared drive, creating a stage, essentially a place where people can gather. It can be creating a once a quarter meeting, right? For anybody who's interested in taxonomies and metadata, let's get together and just talk about it. So sharing really just becomes this behavior practice and a little bit about the shared assets. In there, you can start to spot these things that may be off a bit, right? And then start moving towards unification. And this is an example that origins from Citrix, but I've seen very similar other tech companies, including DocuSign. And so it's really, I think this is a universal issue, which is that if you have different products or different experiences, they may call very common concepts different things, right? So whether it's something like a super user, a root user, these things sort of have implicit meaning sometimes to the end user or customer, but sometimes they don't at all, right? It's just something we've artificially created for them to use. And what's the difference between that? You also find things sometimes in that audit process of bringing folks together and sharing of like master user is not a term we like to use anymore. There's much better alternatives that don't imply that same meaning. And so, bringing that over to something more simple, like, hey, we're going to use a core concept and add a modifier to it, right? It helps to stem, things like translations easier as long as administrators the same every single time. You bring in a lot of savings, but you also are front loading the meaning or value of that modifier there. And you've created a concept that's future-proof and scalable because you have that core concept that can be added to in many ways, right? So it's a practice I like. It's a very simple one, but in those early stages of a terminology process to help bringing people together on it. And I think if we take that and boil it down to the taxonomy, I don't know, Bonnie, if you want to give your kind of a perspective on that same example, what you would see there.
Yeah, so I think building out from the terminology as it's been concepted out as in your previous example, we can see the taxonomy development as then the next level of abstraction, kind of using that more codified concept set coming out of the terminology development as the building blocks we are sorting and describing in terms of the taxonomy modeling or the knowledge graphing we're going to do around that piece. And so we're building that sort of, building these core knowledge models from the ground up using that concept and terminology as the first foundational input source. But the trees and networks that come out of that are multi-directional and again can serve as much broader scaffolding for other systems. But the way it actually sequences out can kind of come from these efforts in sequence. And then at DocuSign, we have also done some of this heavy lifting around the clear and robust definitioning for terms and concepts. And that is not only the building block for the next stages of knowledge modeling, but can also be served back out as information to customers and internal users to already start building that shared language piece and to start driving consistency for that information experience, both through the consistent use of language as an internal resource and how that affects product design and product terminology as those features and experiences are being designed, but also as a reference point for the users themselves who can have this access point for information and having an core understanding of concepts at DocuSign.
So that can have application, whether it's content, whether it's support case taxonomy, like you can start to find individual places that you want to apply this, right? But beyond that, there's an elegance. I think the thing we shoot for is getting to do some of that automatically. Again, content origins, I'm a lazy writer. I will say that to anybody. I prefer to have automated some of the spelling check, for instance, right? Or my grammar checks. I would prefer to have things automatically there. So we reduce the human error within things. And so shooting for that sort of systematic approach has always been a part of my, it's a time saver. You reduce the toil, for those familiar with Google toil as the term. There's a good article out there on that. But just reduce the labor that folks don't want to spend forever doing the same thing. I mean, who wants to copy and paste something 57 times? It's just not very fun, right? So one of the classic examples to introduce first, if you can, with the content teams, but is tagging in, say, even that terminology into your content. So what you see here is a great example, and there's actually a great how to leverage terminology in data article there listed. But anyway, how you might bring in terms, and there's another reference file where these are brought in from, but that way they're standard and they're applied. And if you're lucky to have a CMS that auto updates those things, it's automatically updated every time you produce that content or it self-refreshes, right? So just tagging content with terminology sounds like such a simple thing, but there's many steps in the road to get to this point. You have to have shared and unified glossaries. You have to have a standard way you're introducing it. You have to source to pull from. And so a lot of work goes into that, but at the end of the day, it does make things much more seamless. So you don't have to repetitiously do the same thing again, pulling in those terms. I think this is a more of a architecture than an actual architecture, depending on what systems you may have in play. But I also like to think of kind of those more authoring or creation systems, which you see here on the left. And then how a semantic layer and the knowledge graph storage can kind of help play an important role of bridging the gap between the customer experience platforms, and then ultimately, if you're lucky, the systems of record as well. Starting though from the content and other creation point, you have things like your design standards, and if you can get plugged into your translation, your content systems, your digital asset management systems, your SQL servers, where things are stored, and then even your wireframe stuff. Like there's multiple places where usually folks are creating things. And so that's a common place to look for introduction of a semantic suite to drive some normalization, as well as frankly, just make it easier and faster for the people who are creating things. In addition, there's growth that happens there that you can then pull back into, so you can recognize where there's differences. And I think Bonnie will have a chance to talk a little bit more about that in a second. The other place is on customer experience platforms. I'm oriented towards always trying to help the end user. And so looking to things like search, right? There's on-site search usually, or SEO practices happening. And how do you harness all of this to help drive improvements there, right? So that there's appropriate results happening when you look for something that you can feel confident about. Similarly, as product-led growth becomes a bigger thing, your taxonomies and the key terms and some of the natural language you bring in from these other things are super useful for recommendation engines. Think about how great Amazon is at this, identifying you've been looking at something like this, or if you're searching on Google and you might be interested in this other thing, right? And there's ways to do that on a more practical level that's useful. Like, hey, if I recognize you're at this point in your journey with us, you probably need this as a next step based on what you're trying to do, right? That borderline of we don't want to be creepy, but we want to know enough to be helpful. And then things like chatbots thrive off of good things you can put into them, right? The more structure you put in there, the better they will do at feeling more understandable for your end customer. And then even marketing campaigns, demand campaigns, nurture campaigns, if you can get embedded into those marketing systems. I'd say the upper echelon, and I would not start here, but end here, is sort of looking at those key systems of record. Maybe initially you pull in from them so that you can do mapping, but ultimately, if you can strive for some sort of feeding it to and from as appropriate and arbitration between your core systems of record. I mean, these are like the core infrastructure that makes a company work. But I tell you, if you've got discrepancies between your pricing lists and what the customer actually thinks they're getting out of it and what the product actually does, it's going to cause havoc, right? So the more you can drive towards, it's not necessarily always going to be automation there, that is amazing. If you can have automated arbitration between, but at least a practice of understanding where there are discrepancies there and helping to drive normalization as well. With that, I think, Bonnie's been living this real life lately, so she probably can gain more looking at the core model you've been looking at too.
Yeah, so this is driving in a little bit to some of the knowledge modeling pieces at this stage that we're exploring at DocuSign, and that I've applied recently at a few other places, particularly the organizations that didn't have an enterprise level look at taxonomy existing before. So we abstract on both sides the core models from the endpoint taxonomies that business systems need to run to both serve internal data and external experiences. And getting collaborators especially is helpful in using existing business input, even though a lot of these core taxonomy models are often standards in and of themselves. Using that as a framework to then pull both the organization as people and existing knowledge structures as they currently are stood up at the company is useful in doing the work of setting this up. And then once they're successfully uncoupled as these more universal standards against system needed endpoint taxonomies, published glossaries, and those kinds of things that needed to be built or served from them, it allows us to start building feedback loops around the data that comes back and gets described against those endpoint taxonomies and how they can continue to build out a more enriched and robust set of core models as well.
Yeah, it reminds me of, there's actually somebody on the call, and Bonnie's heard this before, but who gave me a book called 1,000 No's. And I love it because it starts with a young girl who has an idea, right? And I think that's some of us as we're like, hey, I have this great taxonomy or metadata set, right? And but this girl, and she gets someone, and they come along and they give her a no to her great idea, right? And so this happens, and after 1,000 no's, it looks like something else, but it's turned into a yes. And I think there's a magical thing that actually happens as you get that feedback. It's not always easy, but that will actually make it far better. And if you can create an ecosystem with all those feedback loops, you're going to be so much better off and closer to what's actually needed and what will make it thrive, right? Enough about children's books, back to the real stuff.
And so this is a more systems level view of how we can aim to start plugging the semantic platform itself into some of these endpoint business systems and content delivery. So typically the sequence happens well, I shouldn't say typically. I should say there ought to be a sequence. Not all of this is going to happen at once. I have found commonly that the product documentation and/or customer success content is one of the most obvious case needs and the best input source for building out as step one MVP that core set of models, both in terms of having partners to help build that out and to serve as the first functional integration for a system level taxonomy and terminology platform. But the benefit, again, of doing this kind of plugin work is that dynamic publishing piece also of not having to manually edit something like a product name update in 30 different places. So it's both part of the selling point in terms of what there is to gain in efficiency from having an integrated platform, and also the way that we can start to build data flows in both directions.
I think, Erin and Bonnie, if you want to cover this last example, I think it's a great one. And my heart always goes to, again, being someone who's a lazy writer, I also like to make sure people can get answers on their own. So self-help enablement and how you break that down.
Yeah, and so this gives us a view kind of an end-to-end flow of how having a connected knowledge platform in the center of the experience can flow into some of those different solutioning paths from just one core set of knowledge models. So if a user is asking an informational question about what is possible in the product, we can create paths to access points for information, both in terms of rote answers as FAQs, recommended feature paths if it's necessary to upgrade or add new features to accommodate the question that they're asking. And then from there, networking beyond that as well, in terms of, if you are using this feature or solution already, what are some other steps you are likely to complete, or some other pieces of the product that you might be interested in engaging with.
So kind of in summary, and we'd love to open up for some questions and discussion, but start with empathy and common goals. So that source, I think the most effective I've been is always when I start with the empathy of understanding what someone else is trying to drive towards, and what's blocking them from it, and what their goals are. And then if you can kind of cipher that and compare it to your own world and what you're trying to get done. It's an evolving system. I think Bonnie spoke to this quite eloquently, that, as you create that model, as you create that ecosystem of systems, it absolutely should and will be better off if you evolve it and aim to evolve it, make it scalable. Things like natural language coming in from a chat bot, and sales calls if they're recorded, and support calls, and just search queries, like, it can help you so much in making steps, bringing that user really more relevantly into the room as well. Creating space for feedback loops. I think that's a big part of this, is creating a stage for others as well. And then, as well as the work, and then finding and leveraging discrepancies. I think there's somewhere in my life, much like in my relationships, but finding when there's a discrepancy or a difference is actually an opportunity. It's like, I call it a juicy rock, but it's like a rock I can turn over and see what's there and why is it different. I get curious about it. But those discrepancies across different groups or metadata will actually often be an indication that there's more to the story to know, and it could be better. And then start in one area. You can't boil the ocean. I absolutely guarantee if you took this whole thing in and said, we need every single part of this, there will be a very small population that will have any idea what you're talking about, let alone jump on board for supporting the whole thing, right? So start in one area, show some success, then make sure you look at the different applications of things so that you're not building yourself into one of those silos. Look at how everybody else is using it. And that could start with just things like mapping, right? And then you can move, for instance, from content to SEO, from support to marketing, to product to pricing, right? So there's a lot of opportunities where this can be applied.
Thank you once again, Bonnie and Erin, for the wonderful, wonderful presentation. And thank you to everyone for joining in today. Good night. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.